Black, proud, independent, determined, educated, resilient, compassionate, batty, funny, quirky, unique, creative, thoughtful, sincere, loyal, gutsy, vibrant, resourceful, imaginative, engaging, fabulous, awesome. Those are all words that describe me, the Brick City Brown Chick. Welcome to my podcast, What I Know Now. Thanks for listening. Phone rings in the middle of the night. My father yells, "What you gonna do with your life?" "Oh, daddy dear, you know you're still number one." But girls, they want to have fun. Welcome back, everyone, to What I Know Now. I am your host, Brick City Brown Chick, and this is episode 17, Girls Just Hangin' with Nuns. The name of this episode is obviously inspired by the opening lines I used from Cyndi Lauper's breakout 1983 hit, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. That song came out when I was in 8th grade, so the year before I went to high school. I have to start this episode by thanking all of the nuns that ran the high school I went to. Some loved, some loathed, some people just terrified of, but they really did make a huge difference in my life and in the life of the girls I went to school with. So I want to thank them at the beginning of this episode. For me, high school sucked. And I realize that's true for most people, regardless of generation, location, what kind of school you went to. High school was just a exhaustive, stressful, weird time in everybody's life. And it was for me as well. In order to understand my journey through high school, you have to understand where I was when high school started. I went to a Catholic co-ed K through 8 school. So I went to kindergarten in public school, but then from 1st through 8th grade, I was in this Catholic school. Half the teachers were nuns, half the teachers were lay people, and I went to school with boys. So it was a pretty normal environment, I'd say, which made high school even more of a rude awakening. My parents were both school teachers, as I've said many times. They taught public school in the state of New Jersey, and they really did labor and talk and contemplate for a long time where they were willing to send me to high school. My father's concern was about my education. He really wanted to make sure that I got a good education. My mother was concerned about that as well, but because I was such a quiet, introspective child, she was more concerned that if I went to a public school, that I would get picked on or bullied or end up in fights because I was not loud and aggressive. That's not the way Catholic school brings you up. fighting is heavily discouraged. People get suspended at the drop of a hat if they fight in Catholic school. So it's not an environment where you learn to defend yourself. And my mother was very worried that I would just be out of place in public high school. So they talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And then finally one day, probably in the middle of my 8th grade year, they sat me down and said, okay, we've done our homework and our research, and this is what we've concluded. There is one high school in this area that we both agree we would be willing to send you to. And it is Union High School, which was 2 counties, not 2 towns, but 2 counties away from where we lived. We lived in Essex County. Union High School was in Union County. And it didn't really mean anything to me. I was 13. I didn't have a good grasp on how far things were. But that changed really quickly when my mother said, okay, if you go to this high school, we're going to have to pay for it because you'll be out of county, and you would have to be the first stop for the bus in the morning and the last stop for the bus in the afternoon. So that means you'd be on the bus by 5:30 a.m. and you wouldn't be home until probably 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. And that's if you don't participate in any after school activities or anything like that. If you do that, then one of us would have to come get you. And so you'd have to wait the hour or so for us to pick you up. And my immediate reaction was, you have got to be kidding me. I am not going to be, that means I'd have to be up at 4:45, 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, I am not a morning person. I freely admit this. Was never a morning person. Not as an infant, not as a child, not as a teenager, not as a young adult, not as a middle-aged adult. I am not a morning person. So the idea of being up at 4:45 or 5 a.m. to catch a bus was insane to me. So my response was, what is the alternative? Because that was totally not going to work for me. And my mother said, the alternative is you're going to have to go to Catholic high school. And that immediately put even more of a damper on this conversation, because I don't know about now. I know a lot of the Catholic high schools, including the one I went to, have closed because of charter schools, because of people wanting their kids to have a different environment, and private schools and all that sort of thing. But when I was in Catholic high schools were a big thing. And the Catholic Church believed that the best way to educate both boys and girls as teenagers was to separate them, because puberty, because hormones, because all those things that teenagers go through. Catholic Church said, okay, you know what? The best way to deal with this is girls are going to go to school with girls and boys are going to go to school with boys. Now, there are pros and cons to this kind of approach, but that's what was popular. So I automatically knew by my mother saying, you're going to have to go to Catholic high school, that meant I was going to an all-girls school. So my options were get to go to public school and interact with everybody, but be up at the crack of dawn and probably be home really late doing my homework on the bus for the most part, or go to Catholic school with a bunch of girls and continue my Catholic school education. So extremely reluctantly, I agreed to the latter. I agreed to go to Catholic high school. And that's what happened. I went to a high school called Marylawn, which existed for, I think, close to 60 years before it closed. It closed probably 10 years ago or so. And Marylawn, the full name of the school was the Academy of Marylawn of the Oranges. I know, super fancy, right? The Oranges, if you're from New Jersey, you know what the oranges means. If you're not from New Jersey, you're thinking, oranges? Like fruit? No, not exactly. In New Jersey, there are 4 towns with the name Orange in northern New Jersey. There is West Orange, South Orange, East Orange, and Orange. Just Orange. No, there is no. What are we missing? One of the oranges. One of them, North Orange. Sorry. There is no North Orange. That does not exist. No one seems to really know why. I guess if there was a North Orange, it would probably be the town that's just called Orange, but there isn't one. So, Mary Lawn of the Oranges really meant this is the Catholic school for girls, mostly from one of those towns. I was not from any of those towns. I was from Newark. So that already made me a little different when I got to high school. When I went there, the high school was probably, I'd say 60-40. So it was probably 60% white and 40% black. It was probably 90% Catholic school girls who had gone to Catholic grade school. There were very few public school girls. It was such a intense, serious environment, and it was very Catholic, like Catholic schools are, in terms of you went to mass, you went to confession, you had to take religion as a course all 4 years you were there. So sometimes even public school girls who started out at that school would either leave during the first year or after the first year, because if you weren't Catholic, it was such a weird, intense environment. So that was the setup for me going to Catholic school. One of the big things I had to do before I went was go for the placement test. This was the type of school that prided itself on being college preparatory. So what did that mean? That meant that in order to get into the school, you had to apply. It was not an automatic admission. They would look at your grades, and if you had any volunteer work or extracurricular activities, all those sorts of things. They would look at your family history, how many siblings you had, how many siblings your parents had, if your parents were Catholic, all these types of things. So because my parents were not Catholic, I didn't particularly think they were going to accept me or not, but I had really great grades. And I came as a highly recommended student. So I was accepted, but once I was accepted, I had to take the placement test. Now, for college age people, some people, when they go into college as freshmen, if the college thinks their skills are not up to college level, they will put them in remedial courses. Sometimes remedial English courses, sometimes remedial math courses to help them get up to speed. This particular placement test was a math placement test, and the school used it to decide which group of your peers you would be placed in. So the way that worked is we had 3 groups. We had the A group, the B group, and the C group. The A group girls were the exceptionally intelligent, likely to go to the Ivy League girls. These are girls who were very good at math, would probably take multiple foreign languages. They were just students that were on a whole nother level. So that was A group. B group girls were considered average to above average, and they were not as great at math as the A group girls. They were also college bound, maybe not Ivy League, maybe they would go to a regular college or a state college, but the expectation is still that all of these girls would go to college. And they may not have been academic whiz kids, but they were going to get good grades. Their grades were important to them, maybe not as important as they were for the A group girls, but their grades were still important to them. So that was the B group girls. The C group girls were considered average by the school. Now, my view of the situation was always that the C group girls in our school would have been A group girls or international baccalaureate or high honors in any public school because they were smart. But for the way the school was set up, they felt like these girls were either borderline college material or maybe not college material. They might go to trade school or something like that, even though probably 90% of them ended up going to college just like everyone else. So already walking into high school, it was already a clique kind of situation. I was in the B group. I was perfectly cool with that because I had no desire to spend 4 years banging my head against a wall, taking all kinds of crazy courses that the girls in the A group tended to take. We all had to take Spanish or French. So A, B, and C, we all had to take a language. We had to take it for 2 years, and then we had the options for years 3 and 4. Girls in the A group did the same thing. They took Spanish or French, but they also took Latin. Latin is a great language in terms of learning words and the root of words and where we get words from. But I had no interest in trying to balance Spanish and Latin. It was just a whole lot. People would get things mixed up and backwards, and I just had no interest of that. So instead of Latin, I took world history. And world history was hugely effective for me because it really did help me see the world outside of an American perspective, which at 14 I haven't given a whole lot of thought to, but it was super important for me foundationally to take world history. So going into high school, we were already sort of separated into our groups. And then from your groups, you end up in smaller groups. You end up with cliques of girls. I was in, I think the way I looked at it in high school is like we were the social outcasts. Like we were girls that there were 7 or 8 of us. We didn't particularly have a lot in common, but we had more in common with each other than we do with anybody else. So we ended up in our own little social circle. High school was super challenging from the perspective of because my high school was a private school and a Catholic school and a college preparatory school, their attitude toward schoolwork really was the more the better. So for your English class, you might have a week to read the play Macbeth, and then you were going to talk about it for 2 or 3 days in class, and then you were going to take a test. And it was just constant, lots of work. So the benefit for me was I really did learn time management. I really did learn, okay, this is the time I've got to set aside for my studies and my work, and this is the time I'll have left over to do the things I want to do. And that time management is one of those things people struggle with hugely in college. If you go away to college and you've never been away from home or your parents, and all of a sudden you're thrown into this world of, okay, you're 18, everybody expects you to be an adult, your professors expect you to figure it out. No one's going to hold your hand and say, oh, you should study for 2 hours. And oh, don't forget to go to the cafeteria. And oh, don't forget you've got to do laundry. Nobody's going to talk you through any of that. You really do have to have your head on straight and manage your time wisely. So high school was great for that for me. The other reason high school was great is because it was an environment of all girls, and the teachers were all women, except this couple of years where we had a man who had gone through the seminary to be a priest, and he dropped out before he took his final vows and decided to become a school teacher. So he was literally the only man in the entire school, which was just funny to us as girls, not so funny for him exactly. But because it was an environment of mostly women, it taught me to be fearless when it came to education. Something I observed and learned when I went to college is that the girls who had gone to co-ed schools were much more timid in class in terms of answering questions. They were embarrassed, I guess, for lack of a better word. They were embarrassed to be smart, or they were embarrassed for other people to know they were smart. That was never me in college. I was always proud of the fact that I'd gotten a good education, I'd paid attention, I'd gotten good grades. And if I knew the answer to a question a professor would ask, I had no problem raising my hand and answering that question. I think a lot of girls grow up with, at least from my generation, from the Gen X generation, you grew up with girls are supposed to be pretty, not necessarily smart. Like, if you're smart, good for you, but don't show it off. Don't make other people feel bad that you're smart. And I never had that problem. So, one of the things I know now is, regardless of whether your daughters go to a co-ed school or a single sex school, it's super important that they learn that their education is the most important thing they'll ever have, and that being smart is more important than being liked. And I think that's a hard concept for teenagers, especially because teenagers want to be liked. They want to be in the in crowd. They want to be with people who accept them. That, regardless of generation, never changes. That was true for my parents' generation, which is the silent generation. It was true for the boomers. It's true for Gen X. It's true for millennials. It's true for Gen Y. It's true for Gen Alpha. Everybody wants to be liked, but you have to reach a level of maturity and understanding to know that that will not be the most important thing in your life. And until you reach the age of maturity and understanding, it really is up to your parents to instill in you that intelligence is a good thing. My parents always told me my most important job as a child was my education, was my grades. They always stressed that that is what was going to take me where I wanted to go in life, was my education. So that was always my number one priority, and that did not change in high school. And I think a lot of people get derailed in high school because they begin to feel like there are other things. There are girls, there are boys, there are parties, there are sports, there's lots of other things going on, and they get sidetracked. And the benefit of the high school I went to was that there was so much work, so much to do. I never got sidetracked. people always ask me, like, when you go to an all-girls school, like, do you have sports? Like, what goes on there? We did. We had all sorts of sports teams. We had a tennis team and a softball team and a volleyball team and a basketball team. And I'm sure there are others I'm forgetting. But we had all those sports that public schools had. We played against other Catholic schools. So that's sort of limited your contact with people. I think one of the difficulties of Catholic school, at least when I went, again, I don't know about now, but when I went, Catholic school was very much a bubble. The nuns really did work to create an environment of you're here, this is the most important thing in your life, and as much as we can, we are going to protect you from the outside world, at least while you're here. This is the environment that we have control over, and we're going to protect you as much as we can. I did think that was a good thing when I was in high school. As I've gotten older, what I've realized is that what we were was sheltered. And people ask me, what the difference is between protected and sheltered. I guess technically not that much, but in terms of being sheltered, I know now that lots of things I should have learned as a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, I didn't learn until I was a 19, 20, 21-year-old woman when I was in college. Being separated from boys during those critical years also came with some complications. As I said, the good part about that was that I got a good education and I had no fear of being smart. The downside to that is when I got to college, I knew probably less than zero about boys, about men, because that was not a topic of conversation with my parents. My mother's view of the situation was, okay, I know at some point you're going to find some knucklehead boy you want to date. That's fine. Just make sure you have some protection. Like, that was really my mother's feeling about the situation. She had had the birds and the bees talked with me years before I think I was 9 when we had that conversation, which was kind of a little freaky to a 9-year-old, but good on her that she was like, I'm going to nip this in the butt. I'm going to make this clear so that there's no questions about it later. Whereas my father sort of had the opposite feeling. He sat me down one day and said, do you know what my job is as your father? And I really had no idea what he meant or what he was talking about. So I said, no, Dad, I don't. Why don't you tell me what your job is as my father? And he said, my job as your father is to keep you away from boys as long as possible. Because I was a boy and I know how boys think. And so that's my job. I'm going to keep you away from them as long as possible. Which, as a 14, 15-year-old girl, I was kind of like, really? Okay. So my parents sort of came at this from different directions, but those were the minimal conversations we had. So when I got to college and boys were interested in me or I was interested in a boy, it was just a very weird situation because I had no foundation to base things on. I didn't go through high school going on group dates or dates or anything like that. It was very funny in our school that the nuns always told us that, boys were for later in life or hopefully not at all because some of us would follow in their footsteps and become nuns. No one from my graduating class went into the convent, and apparently we were the first graduating class in 50 years where nobody went to the convent. Our principal made her displeasure very clear during her graduation speech on that particular subject. But I just had no foundation. So college was a rude awakening for me in terms of dating. Like I said, I had no problem with time management or getting done the things I needed to do, but dating was like a whole new world and in a very weird kind of way. So that's another thing I know now is if I had a daughter, I would really have to think long and hard about whether I wanted her in a single sex environment, in an all girl environment, because there are definitely pros and cons to the situation. And you really do have to figure out what is going to work for your child. When I graduated high school, like everybody who graduates high school, I was a very different person than the one I had been when I walked in that door. When I walked in the door at 14, I was nervous and unsettled and not crazy about the fact that I was back in Catholic school again and didn't know what the next 4 years would be like. When those 4 years ended, so much had happened to me as a person, not just the growth and the education and all those types of things, but also, my father had died and I was about to go to college 6 hours away from home. And there were so many things about me that were different. But what high school did do was, I guess what my mother would say is, high school toughened me up. It really did make me understand that I had my own voice and I had to be my own advocate. And I had to be clear about what I was willing to do and what I was not willing to do. And I'm not sure I would have become the person I am had I gone to public school. I think my mother was probably right in her fears about me getting sidetracked or bullied or, whatever the word is you want to use. I think I would have come out very differently. And what I always say is high school didn't harden me, but it did make me tougher. It did make me sort of do this. It did make me learn to defend myself and understand that I was my own best defense, is what I will say. So high school was an adventure that I would not want to relive in my wildest imaginations. What I always say is I would like my 15-year-old body, but with my 53-year-old brain. And that's the truth. I would not want to relive all the craziness that went on. I mean, it's not the craziness that people think goes on in an all girls school. I can't speak for boarding schools. I did not go to boarding school. But anytime you say you went to an all girls school to people, they sort of raise their eyebrows and go, are all girls schools as interesting as people think they are? No, they're really not, at least not in that particular way. It's just a lot of discipline and thinking. And that's the other thing I would say that high school taught me is it really did teach me to think independently, which is not something people think about Catholic schools. And I don't know that most Catholic schools are like this, but the nuns we had in our school really were true teachers. Even though they had lived very cloistered, very sheltered lives, they were out teaching. They were out teaching the next generation. So they really did pay attention to the world and things that happened and made us sit down and think, okay, what is your place in this world? What is it that you are planning or that you are going to do that is going to make this world better. And that is something I have carried with me through my entire life. And it is something that sometimes really frustrates me about other people. I don't do well interacting with people who are just me, me, me. The world is all about me. I don't care what happens to other people. I don't care about racism, sexism. As long as it doesn't affect me, I don't care. I don't do well with people like that. And the reason I don't is because of that upbringing and that foundation of your life is about you, it's yours. But what's really important is how you give to others and how you serve others. So that's the greatest lesson I took away from high school is how to give and how to serve and how to make your gifts count. And that's the biggest lesson I took away from high school. I want to thank everybody for joining me for this episode today. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. There are 16 previous episodes that you can listen to. You can get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Sirius, Amazon Music, all those types of places. If you'd like to see the podcast, if you'd like to see me talk, in addition to hear me talk, you can go to my YouTube page. The page is Brick City Brown Chick. You type in those words, you'll get a pop-up of me. It's a cartoon version with glasses and a huge afro that I've never actually had, but it's very cute. So you'll see that and you click on that and it'll take you to all the episodes of this podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody, today, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.